get by. It resides between my eyes. Walk through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. And I will formally introduce Cameron Healy in a second. But Cameron, I like to point out some past episodes that people should check out. And I love having the brands and the people who have created things I love. Okay. And you're one of those people, by the way. Creating Kona Brewing and KETTLE Chips but some of the past ones, we have a mutual friend, Healy, the founder of Wild Tonic. And if you're watching the video, like she's got these beautiful, beautiful bottles.
She sent you some samples.
Yeah. I mean, I went into a grocery store, a specialty store. I bought it. It sticks out to you because, as you know her from the glass blowing days, I'm like, wow, that is amazing. And I tried it and it's even more amazing. And I snapped a shot of it and I emailed them. I'm like, I would love to have you on my podcast. I'm a huge fan of your kombucha. And I've had the founders of Big League Chew, Bill Nelson. He has super interesting story about being just in the bullpen of a minor league team and coming up with, he didn't want to chew tobacco and, he wanted some kind of healthier alternative. And he came up with shredded gum, and Bram from Letco, he's got this healthier version of Nutella that he came up with. So just some really cool brands, and Cameron will take us to the genesis, back to genesis of creation, which you said before, which I love that. But before I introduce Cameron, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And we do that by helping you run your podcast. And, for me, Cameron, the number one thing in my life is relationships. And I'm always looking at a way to give to my best relationships, profile them, shout from the rooftops what they're working on, what they're doing. And I've seen no better way over the past decade to have people on my podcast and let people know what they're doing and what they're working on. So if you've thought about creating a podcast out there, you should. And if you have questions, you could go to rise25.com and email us. Today's guest is Cameron Healy, who founded Kona Brewing Company and KETTLE Chips. Yes, the KETTLE Chips, the delicious KETTLE Chips that we know and love. And he also runs the Healy Foundation, which is after his parents. And I'm going to have, Cameron talk about his parents a little bit and their journey. But Cameron, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jeremy. It's an honor to be here. So
tell me a little bit more. I want to start almost in reverse for a second and talk about the Healy Foundation.
Okay. The Healy Foundation is really, in a lot of ways, is sort of my end game, I suppose, without having, when I started, it wasn't necessarily, didn't mean that, but it was started about 1996. And it was really it was a 501c3 was created to put on a Celtic music festival that I organized with some friends in Oregon, outside of Oregon. It was a 3-day camping thing. And I was sort of in a mode of re-embracing my Celtic roots and my family roots, which are very Irish. And I thought my father had recently passed away, and I thought it'd be a nice way to honor him and raise some money for battered and abused women and children, which was a cause that he favored. And so did that, and had a fabulous show. The only problem was in early September of that year of 96, we picked a weekend that was statistically the least rainfall. And of course, it rained 3 inches that weekend. And it was you could camp there, and it was in a state park. And so it was a little bit like a mini Woodstock, where
that's what I was saying. It's a modern day Woodstock, right?
People were in mud, and those that did come huddled together and had just a great great experience. Our headliner, Ashley McGuisick from Canada, was going to be our headliner. I think we had 20 some Celtic music groups and individuals. He got busted for pot at the U.S. border, so he couldn't show up. So we had to shift people around. But we lost a little bit of money, but we still put some money into the cause. The next year, we actually made some money. The sun did shine, but I decided that doing outdoor events to raise money in the nonprofit world probably wasn't the smartest thing to do in Oregon, and to be consistent. I've been involved in a outdoor event in Hawaii for 25 years. It actually has been very successful, but the difference is you're in Hawaii. The sun is usually shiny here in Kona. In '99, I hired an executive director, friend of mine, to really create a plan, and it was really around youth, the environment, and community was our mission. And I've been funding the foundation ever since, sort of progressively, as I've built businesses and sold them. I've donated shares before selling, and funded an endowment, which has grown over the years. And that endowment today represents about 50% of my estate. And when I pass away, essentially all of the balance will go into the foundation. So it's meant to be a perpetual foundation. We have a small team, executive director, second executive director, and our original one retired, but is still a board member. And so we've got a younger crew of program directors in their 40s, and to carry it on into the future. Our geographical focus is state of Oregon and the state of Hawaii, doing that work. And those are two places that I live, and I split my time between the two and love both environments. And so it's great opportunity to make a difference and have an impact in these places.
Cameron, I'd love to hear what it was like growing up. What were your parents like growing up?
I'm a baby boomer. I'm right sort of statistically in the middle of the age group of the baby boomers. And so my parents were sweethearts when they were 15 years old. My father went off to war when he was 18, almost 19, and saw a lot of combat in the 10th Mountain Division in the Italian mountains, and came back, survived that, and they married. And he went to college on GI Bill. My mother went through college in Oregon. During the war, she said there weren't many men there at the University of Oregon during the war, but they all came back with GI Bills. But anyway, my father, by late 40s, had a bachelor's degree, and the first child was my sister, who was born in 1949, and they moved from Portland, Oregon, to a place called Bend, Oregon, which was a little mill town about 3 hours from Portland, to manage. My father had a job to manage a furniture store that had been the original furniture store in that region, founded in 1916, that his father, who was a furniture manufacturer, had some interest in. And so they moved over. They were pregnant with me, 1950. I was born in 51. And, it was a pretty idyllic place to grow up. It was a little mill town.
I've heard amazing things about Bend.
Oh yeah, it's a real fast growing place now, but it's at the foot of the Cascades, east side of the Cascades. One side is the mountains, the other side is the high desert. River runs right through it. Very pristine kind of place. And, the timber, cutting trees and making lumber was the dominant industry, and hunting and fishing was the dominant sport. My father, having grown up skiing on Mount Hood in Oregon and been in the 10th Mountain Division, trained in Colorado mountain warfare, was a lover of the mountains. And so moving over to Bend, Oregon, he connected with a local ski club there that had been started by Scandinavian timber industry workers in 1927, and started hiking up this mountain called Mount Bachelor, and skiing down. And they talked about for decades that mountain had always had beautiful, ample snow and dry snow, and it was a beautiful mountain. So my father got the idea to start a ski resort up there, and he opened a ski resort. Had a hard time getting local people to invest because they didn't think that people would travel very far to come skiing in Central Oregon. And he persevered and opened it with a rope tow and a pommel lift and a little warming lodge when I was 7 years old, and I was there skiing the first day it was open. But so I grew up in the ski resort industry and grew up on that mountain. And my father was an entrepreneur, and I learned by observing, not knowing that I was learning, but in a way, he kind of groomed me to follow in his footsteps eventually. My mother was college educated, a degree in interior design, and so they ran this furniture store as well. My mother would design, space for clients and organize furniture for them to put in their spaces. And the 50s was a great economic boom, the 50s and the 60s, and it was good. But my father's real passion and love was skiing and building the ski resort. And they ran this retail furniture store until the 70s, and eventually closed it and sold the building. But the office for the ski resort for years was right in the furniture store. So it was pretty humble beginnings, but ultimately the ski resort grew into a world-class ski resort as a destination. And my father was one of the early people that had a vision for Central Oregon to not just be a place that people would come in winter and go skiing, but to be a year-round destination, recreation-based economy. And that's essentially how it's evolved today. I think he would be happy with it. It's just, it's grown lots of arms and legs, and population is many, many fold what it was when he was alive. But, I was lucky enough to assimilate his strengths with managing people and following a vision, and watching him sweat through the hard years and the hard days when it didn't snow. And my mother had a great aesthetic sense and a good eye, and I think I got some of that from my mom. But they were great parents, and it was kind of an Irish Catholic town when my family arrived there. So I grew up in that community, and my old school is now a pub and a brewery, with the classrooms turned into hotel rooms, and they.
So you can visit often when you go back.
Yeah, well, I have a room that's named after me. When the McMinimum brothers that have 50 historical sites where they convert them to these lifestyle places, and this because it was owned by the former Catholic Church and part of the Catholic community. They interviewed a lot of people from the community, including myself and my sister. But later they came back and said, well, we're naming rooms after different characters, and we'd like to name a room and tell your story inside. And so they did inside the room with kind of a cobbled together bio that was a little bit embarrassing. My mother on the opening day came and read it, and she sort of raised her eyebrows. I think it emphasized my counterculture LSD days a little bit too much. But anyway, it's still there, and I get to stay there occasionally. I don't get a discount, unfortunately.
Cameron, tell me, you mentioned your dad and you learned a lot observing. What were some of the lessons you learned that you then took into your businesses?
What I learned from my dad was really the courage to follow your convictions and believe in what's possible. And also to overcome barriers that get put in front of you when it may be a a lack of funding to move things forward, capital the way you want, or problems where the equipment breaks down and customers are not happy, and I watched them deal with that. But really around following your passion, having a passion, and staying true to that for years and decades, and build on it systematically, and also building an organization culture that is very people centric, that has a lot of respect for the employees, and really creating a community, a kind of a culture and a community around your mission of the business. And so I very much took those, and I took those with me, which I didn't know I had those until I started my first business at age 21. I just did it on a impulse, but found there was kind of some hard wiring for some of these kind of values, I guess, around and approaches to running a business.
So take me back. You're 21. What's your idea?
Well, I'm 21. I mentioned I'm a baby boomer, and was very much a product of the 60s. Time I was finishing high school and going to college, and my hair was getting pretty long, and my beliefs in the power of a generation through music and alternative lifestyle choices, that we could build a better world. Vietnam War was continuing to rage. I had, right first year into college was 1969, University of Washington. It was a hotbed for student anti-war protest, and I got very much swept up into that movement, and all the alternative values that go with that. So, my dad was a World War II veteran, and we didn't see eye to eye politically. Ultimately, I went away to college for an education, and I think more of my education was the environment of college than probably the classroom part of it. But my own way, I thrived. But my parents didn't really understand my path as many parents did. But by the time I was 21, I had just finished my junior year of college. I by then had moved back to Oregon. I'm an Oregon native. I was at the University of Oregon, but I had adopted, as part of my counterculture path, that previous summer, which was 1970, I'd gone to Japan with a close friend. We hitchhiked for 7 weeks. Had a really amazing trip, but it really kind of turned into, in a way, kind of a spiritual journey where we met people along the way, Westerners as well as Japanese, were practicing Zen meditation. We stayed on a commune, the southern island of Japan, of Kyushu, a hippie commune of Japanese that were practicing yoga and chanting to Shiva and Rama and singing Bob Dylan songs, even though none of them spoke English. But came back from that trip, both of us kind of looking for kind of an Eastern spiritual discipline, and ultimately landed on a yoga lifestyle, Kundalini yoga. And so by the time I was 21, I was living in a local Kundalini yoga ashram. I was wearing a turban. I'd grown my beard long. I already had a long beard, but it got to grow longer. I wrapped my long hair in the turban, and I was getting up at 3 a.m. and practicing yoga as a group in our little yoga commune, 3 hours a day, and teaching yoga. And I was I'd just come back from a yoga festival in California, summer solstice festival, and I had planned to go to college that summer just to get it done, get my senior year done early. And I went to the first class and just realized I couldn't sit in a classroom for the summer. I literally got up and walked out and went and got my refund, and it's like, well, yeah, I gotta get a job, I guess, do something for the summer. And a friend in our yoga community said, "Hey, I know these hippies in town here that have this little bakery in the back of a natural food store, and they want to get out of it. They want to sell it." And so I said, let's go see it. Let's go check it out. And it was in the back of this natural food store that was owned by the Kesey family. And the Kesey family, their well-known family member, Ken Kesey, who was a writer and wrote the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was made into film. The book Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test was written about him in the early 60s, and their bus tour across the country with the Merry Pranksters taking LSD. But anyway, that was Ken Kesey, and it was his brother and sister-in-law that ran the creamery, the family creamery. They were making a new yogurt called Nancy's Yogurt, and they also had this natural food store, and it was a real hippie scene. It was going on in Eugene. It's actually Springfield, outside of Eugene. But anyway, I made a deal on this little bakery and borrowed $1,000 from my sister, and we wrote a contract on a piece of cardboard that I would pay him the balance. I think I bought it for $2,000 and pay off the balance over the summer, and got the recipes. It was a going concern. They had customers making whole grain breads and carob brownies. I don't know if you've ever heard of carob, but at one time chocolate was evil in the early days of natural foods, and carob was the alternative. We also made granola, and I took it over with the idea of employing people in our yoga community, and so I spent the summer working hard and teaching yoga and practicing yoga. And
did you have any reservations at the time? I mean, it seems like a big undertaking to just take over this.
Not a single reservation. It was just like, hey, this is cool. This fits. This will serve our community. It was really about creating jobs and doing right livelihood. And Eugene, Oregon, in that era was a real kind of hotbed of cottage alternative lifestyle businesses, whether it be food or clothing or other things. There was just this kind of great expression of entrepreneurship and networking and helping each other. And so it was a very very great time to be doing a business of that type. And I was over my head. I didn't, it was a steep learning curve, but I bought this little van, and we delivered 50-gallon garbage, plastic garbage cans full of bulk granola, and to these stores. And
sounds great.
Bread, and I had to finish college that after that summer, which dawned on me I had to do that, but somehow I managed to get through my college time and still run this bakery that last year.
What was the next milestone for you in business?
Well, the next milestone was at the end of 73, which was been a whole year since I'd been running the bakery. I got married. I'd met a woman with 2 children at that previous year's yoga festival, and she ultimately moved up to Eugene late that summer. So I forgot to mention that I was suddenly thrown into a parenting role in a new relationship at age 21. But the following spring, I got married. Our guru came to town and married us, and it was also the last day of my last final in college. So I got married and took that final, and the plan was to leave Eugene and move to San Francisco. The business was doing well. I had turned it over to the community. It wasn't something that I was planning to own for myself, but it was kind of an altruistic motive, and so it was left to others. It had a good flow going. We'd moved to a new location, and ultimately that business was called Golden Temple Bakery, and it in a few years was solely focused on cereal and grew into $100 million natural cereal company.
Wow.
But I was not directly involved with it. Summer of '73, I wanted to move to San Francisco, be part of the scene there with my new young family. But there was a new ashram, Kundalini Yoga ashram opening there. We were all planned to go, but ended up going to Bend to leave a few things in storage with my parents. But the new ashram fell through. We waited, and then it didn't work out. And so we ended up spending the summer in Bend, and then that fall moved to a town about 2 hours away called Salem, Oregon, where I have ancestors that homesteaded there in 1845 off the Oregon Trail. So some deep roots, but it was a pretty quiet little conservative state capital, and I wasn't quite sure if they were ready for family with turbans and long beard and ready to teach yoga. But anyway, we settled there and found our way. But I quickly, by that fall, opened a natural food distribution business because the natural food was not an industry; it was really more of a movement. But there were all these great, innovative products being developed, particularly out of Southern and Northern California, and I saw an opportunity to introduce those to the Northwest. And so I made some contacts in California, and it's got some exclusive product lines, mostly yogurt, dairy-based products. Bought a used refrigerated truck and started distributing natural food products from Seattle to Washington, clear down to the southern border of Oregon, to co-ops and natural food stores and natural food buying clubs, what used to exist, and kind of grew up with as it became more of an industry. There were, these hippies that would run, semi trucks up from California with all kinds of, manufactured products. They're running freight, and it was a crazy time. There were a lot of characters, and but you felt really linked to a movement. And ultimately, my little business evolved, and I bought a competitor, and so we had semi trucks we were running, and delivery trucks, and our ashram grew in Salem, Oregon, and we employed a lot of people both inside of our community and outside of our community. We also had a natural food restaurant. So, by now we're in mid 70s, 76. I started having more children. And so really by 76, I had 4 children, and we were living very communally. And, our natural food distribution business was linked up with the Eugene Bakery. We became kind of one big socialistic experiment. So I contributed that distribution business also to our communal entity. And that was working pretty well. I was distributing the bakery products. And then by 78, natural food movement had kind of hit a plateau. There'd been a lot of growth, and then things kind of leveled out. And that was an era where the first events of businesses going out of business that, nobody really knew what they were doing with all these fledgling natural food businesses. We were driven by vision and lifestyle passion, but, nobody really had any skills, and let alone any capital. So, all these businesses were very underfunded. So we saw some of the first, I guess you'd call them, failures of businesses closing, which were sobering. And even our business was kind of being run on a shoestring, and things got tight. And I was always sort of the ringleader of expansion and creating new products and opportunities. Excuse me, there's some noise in the background. So I was kind of seen to be a little bit controversial, because I always had plans for the next new product, and I'd created some brands, So I was basically asked to leave the business because the group wanted to kind of consolidate it and let it calm down a little bit and not try to grow. And so,
You
that
were
was
pushing for more growth.
yeah, sort of a misalignment of vision, I guess, or lack of alignment. And so I stepped out and not really knowing what we're going to do. But to backtrack a little bit, some of your listeners, older listeners, may remember a product called the Wagaroo Chew, which we created. It was actually created on my 22nd birthday, but by some of our fellow commune people when they were baking granola. They made a little kind of bar made from nuts and seeds and honey and other things, and it would harden, and we ended up ultimately packaging it and marketing it, and it was really one of the first energy bars, and it's not around anymore, but it was around for a few decades, and there's a lot of people have fond memories of Wagaroo Chews, and that name is an Eastern mantra, and it means infinite bliss. So that was one of the things we put a lot of focus on.
Sounds delicious. Just to give people a reference point, Cameron, what were some of the other products on the market? Maybe some of the non-healthy things on the market, because I totally love the healthy natural products. So I'm sure if I was a part of that movement, I would have just devoured everything that was in that arena. Well, what else was on the market, healthy or non-healthy at that time?
Well, particularly some of there were brands that were coming out of Los Angeles that aren't around anymore. Altadena Dairy had a natural yogurt line. There was another yogurt line called Continental Yogurt that was made by a small company in LA. It was really very high quality. They made kefir, which is now popular, but I introduced kefir to the Northwest. It was kind of an unknown quantity. Celestial Seasonings teas from Colorado were at their very beginning, and I ended up with exclusive distributorship of Celestial Seasonings teas. I distributed a brand called Barbara's. They had snacks. They had a potato chip. There was a tortilla chip called Hava Chips. They're still around, and they haven't changed at all since the 70s. And that's where I kind of learned about the market for chips and distributing those in that era. There were brands, natural food brands that were created, and some have lasted and made the cut. Some haven't, but again, those were heady days of entrepreneurial innovation around the natural food world. And I really believe that, it was in those early days, it was just, that was just a niche. It was for people who had really adopted an alternative lifestyle, but it was a niche. It was far from being mainstream. But I had this belief that, kind of my core values around that, the world would start opening up and, developing and kind of becoming more enlightened around environment and peace and health and how we ate. And I believe that natural foods would eventually become mainstream.
Are you surprised by how quickly or slowly that got adopted at all?
That's a great question. It seems slow in my time, because it did take a couple. Well, I don't know. It took, just trying to think. It really wasn't until the 80s that natural food started to be embraced by supermarkets and, in a tentative way initially. But that was a good 10, 12 years of very much focusing on the niches.
Did you see any key players, products, or companies help with that? like obviously today we think of Whole Foods, right? And are there any key players that really kind of sped that up?
Key players that exist now?
No, like in the 80s, like
that were
any products
part of the mass market piece.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Sort of those ones that made that transition. I
don't know if
know.
there's a crossover product that like some people, it's like tastes good, but it's super healthy, and it kind of converted people that were, maybe not the most conscious of their health or peace or whatever, and that converted them. But it was because of this product. I don't know if there was that.
I think
gateway product. We'll call it the gateway product.
I mean, to me, which is very personal, but I think one of the ones that fits that is Kettle Chips, and that's why it was really created to be that one.
Talk about Kettle Chips.
There were juice companies, Newton's Juice, out of Northern California. They were one of those ones that made that, with a very much of a core natural food beginning, made that transition to a bigger, broader market.
So talk about Kettle Chips, the inception.
Well, the inception was, so here I am with no job, 4 kids.
I'm stressed out thinking about it. Yeah.
No income, living on credit.
You're so calm.
Still part of our, leader in our community. But I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do. This is May of 1978. I knew I could probably take a month to figure that out. And then I had to start generating income. I kind of looked around for, maybe somebody would hire me in the natural food space, but there wasn't really anything there. And being a guy with a turban and a beard, it kind of limited who wanted to hire you. So sorry, this is 1978. So I had some experience in the natural food industry. So I thought I'll just fall back to what I know. And I had a friend who I'd sold a beat up old refrigerated van to a few years before. And I asked him if he still had that. And he said, yeah, it's out behind. He was the natural food distribution, Seattle. And he said, yeah, it's out sitting in the tall grass behind my warehouse. And I said, well, if I can get it running, will you rent it to me? So I didn't have any money. So I did and got it running and started distributing raw milk cheese. I had a connection with a manufacturer and just started distributing bulk cheese up and down to those same retail customers. That evolved into nuts, raw nuts, 50-pound bags of organic sunflower seeds, cashews, peanuts, 100-pound bags of peanuts. And then started, I've got these nuts, I might as well start roasting them, set up a little roasting plant in Salem, hired a couple people, started oil roasting and then dry roasting. And I thought, well, you got dry roasted nuts, let's make peanut butter and almond butter and cashew butter. So started making those products and, had a warehouse and had a little semi truck by then that with employees that were distributing these to distributors as well as retailers. But by late 81, I was thinking, I really want to create a brand that has the legs to transcend purely to be a core natural food product, but also to transcend that and be a go-to product, a natural go-to product in mass market, in supermarkets. And because I had distributed chips in the 70s, I always knew that they had a high velocity of turnover. People love their snacks. And so my goal was we had these vats of oil roasters for making nuts. I thought, well, let me try to make hand-cooked, batch-cooked potato chips the way they did, in the early days before it became automated in the 40s and 50s, and had nobody to go to ask question. There was nobody around that had, at least at that time, I knew that had done it that way. So just started experimenting, making a lot of mistakes. But after a few months and the new summer crop of potatoes, suddenly it came out right. I didn't know why, but we were making consistent chips. And so I had, along with that, developed a package, hired a designer. He wanted $1,000 to create a logo, which I thought was criminal, but I paid it.
You paid $1,000 for that old bakery.
Yeah.
And then you're paying $1,000.
Yeah. And I could afford neither. But the first brand name I designed was actually called Pot Chips. It's the same design that Kettle Chips has today. But in the East Coast, I learned they called original potato chips cooked in a big vat. They called them pot chips because they're made in a pot. So I showed the design to various friends, and I got a lot of thumbs down for various reasons. It had too many other connotations. So Kettle was actually the second choice, and printed bags and started out hand filling bags that we would hand fill. Could make at night in our little nut plant, could make 40 cases a night, and then started selling them to local natural food stores and distributors. And they were kind of a hit right out of the chute. And so after several months, I knew I needed to expand capacity, and I talked the landlord into building a building across the parking lot from my little plant, my little nut plant, which he did. And then I ordered all the wrong equipment to expand, and talked a banker into, which he shouldn't have done, loaning the money for that. And anyway, got that put together by the fall, and expanded production, and then got this was late 82, and by early 1983, got my first order from a supermarket chain, which was Safeway Northern California, an entire semi-load of kettle chips they ordered, and thought, wow, this is great. So we had to put on a second shift to fulfill that. And what we didn't know was really how you manage oil in a fryer, that it does decompose in that it a component called free fatty acids. It gets too much oxygen with the frying, and the oil starts to deteriorate. We didn't understand that, and we were naive and lucky that just running a single day shift, we maintained a certain balance with the oil. But by putting on a second shift, it threw that balance off. But we made all these chips and fulfilled the order and sent it down there. And then a couple of days later, got this call, kind of an angry call from the buyer saying, "Come back, come and pick up this product. It's bad. It's the oil's bad. It's rancid. We're refusing this product." What? And so then we started checking our existing inventory, and it tasted fine when it left our plant, but after a few days, because of this oil, the taste was bad. And so that began a real trial by fire. We didn't know why, and we had to learn, but we also had put inferior product out, and our consumers were getting a bad taste. So we had to quickly hustle and get all this product off the shelves and out of the warehouses. But we also had to learn from our mistakes and how to make kettle chips consistently in a proper way. And so that took weeks to.
What was the original flavor?
Original flavor was lightly salted and no salt.
Got it.
So just two flavors, if you want to call no salt a flavor. And then within a year, there was a third flavor called red chili. That was a very kind of, for people that love really hot food, they loved it, but was not for your common palate. It was a raw, hot, spicy northern New Mexico chilies. But anyway, we got through that crisis and figured out what we'd done wrong, had to make some modifications of equipment. We actually created a lab and started analyzing our oil and got some advice and carried forward. But I thought we potentially could have blown it. And I had basically bet the company on this expansion, and there was a good chance the whole company could have folded. But I still had the nut operation going on that really kind of held the chip operation up while it was kind of finding its way. But it really took a solid 2 years to figure out how to make, even at a basic level, how to make kettle chips in a consistent manner, because we were using a russet Burbank potato, which is the hardest variety to make potato chips out of, because we chose it because of the high natural sugar content. And that's what gives the potato chip its flavor. But that's also what makes it unstable when you store it. It's constantly wanting to convert the starches to sugar. And so from day to day, you don't really know your core ingredient, how it's going to react. We got pretty good at it, but we got really good at it eventually. But those early days, it was every day was a kind of a new adventure of making kettle chips. But we had a really committed group of people.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you survive, but it sounds like because of the nuts side of the business, you were able to, I don't know if hedge is the right word, but at least have a diversified, income stream. So that really helped.
Yeah, without that, it would have been probably wouldn't have made it through that era. But I also had, going back to my early first business of the bakery, I also had a kind of a belief of really, you treat your employees with respect, and you really treat them as kind of a community where you attract hopefully people with a shared passion for what you're doing, and you make it exciting. You make it not just drudgery work, but there's a purpose that you're all there for, is doing something exceptional and giving back to the community and sort of having a little bit of a higher purpose. And so I was always pretty fortunate to generally attract people that really cared about what they did and cared about the mission. And that's really what got us through those difficult years, because we were figuring it out as we go. I mean, nobody was expert at what we're doing, but there was a dedication. So I've always been grateful for that.
Yeah. What sticks out throughout this whole, journey is community and movement. It seems to be a community and movement. And what was another milestone? So Safeway was a positive and negative milestone in the same respect. What was another milestone with kettle chips? Because you were able to turn things around and figure things out.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of milestones, and I'll sort of fast forward. We're 82 is when kettle chips was introduced. By the mid 80s, 85, 86, we were really kind of hitting stride. We had up and down the West Coast distribution. We had some regional supermarkets that were placing it, in both their natural sets, but starting to place it in the regular snack section too, next to Frito-Lay. And things were working pretty well. By 87, I decided that things were going well enough. I'd never been to Europe, and I wanted just to go see Europe and particularly study the food cultures in Europe. And my oldest son by then, one of those two kids that I connected with at a yoga festival, who was by then 19 years old, we decided that we would together take motorcycles to Europe and spend 6 weeks traveling together and just experiencing the cultures, which we did in the fall of 87. And that was, it was kind of not unlike the trip to Japan I took in 1970. Those were kind of life-changing trips, and without really knowing that or anticipating that would happen. But we had a really awesome trip. We landed in Scotland. We put our motorcycles on a freight airline that had a few seats. It doesn't exist anymore, so we could fly with our motorcycles. And then we had to meet a flight on a date 6 weeks later. And so our plan was to drive through Scotland, England, and through Europe and end up in Greece and then turn around and reverse that by a different route. But so got to experience all these great food cultures and other experiences. And then on the way through London, both going and coming back from the continent, I had met a gentleman a few weeks before I left Oregon who was an Oregon native but was living in London, and he invited us to stay in his home in London, which we did, going both ways. But on the way back, we stayed there for several days, and we started talking about, he was a former banker that had left the banking world, was trying to sort of figure out what he's going to do next. And he was intrigued by kettle chips. And so we started talking about, well, sort of just a fun thing to talk about. What if kettle chips came to England? What would that be like? And would there even be interest? And we actually sent my son out into the supermarkets to bring in every potato chip and other snack foods. And we put them out on a big table and kind of tasted and analyzed, and really surmised that that the market was changing, just beginning to change in the UK, where they're starting just the beginning of embracing natural products, and saw an opportunity for kettle chips to really be a kind of a catalyst brand for that movement. And so I wrote up on legal paper by hand, kind of a perception of the market, and agreed with my friend that I'd come back in the spring and together we'd research it more. And this was October, and we flew back and got back immersed in my life in Oregon, and kind of put that to the back of the mind. But got busy, and by late January, I bought my first fax machine. And so he'd sent a fax and said, well, I've been doing this research and this and checking this out. And so what date are you coming? And I was like, oh yeah, I committed that I would go back. I guess I got to fulfill that. And so I bought my first suit and tie, and figuring you got to be dressed up to do business in England. I didn't know, and flew over there in early March. And he'd made some appointments. We went and with a buyer from Marks and Spencer, and we went and visited a potato supplier up in a area called Norfolk. It's an agricultural area a couple hours north of London. And the potato guy said, hey, there's a small potato chip manufacturer. If you're interested in meeting somebody who's making potato chips, we said, sure. So we went, and they're making potato chips the modern way on conveyorized belts, using potatoes that were bred for that kind of processing, which means they bred out the sugars. They were very bland, but their product was uninspiring. But I noticed half their factory was empty, and it sort of a light bulb went on, and said, wow, we could come over here and do a creative deal and utilize. Anyway, I was just there a week, but we ended up just serendipitously putting together relationships and partnerships that by the time I left at the end of the week, we had a plan hatched, which we had a facility that these guys would be willing to sublet us space if I brought in my equipment, and even contract some of their labor. We had a potato supplier that really understood the differentiation that we were trying to do with potatoes. And I began, and they introduced some alternative varieties. They didn't have russet Burbank, wasn't being grown, but some other varieties that had high sugar. And I actually began a series of smuggling British potatoes back to Oregon. You're not really supposed to do that. And I learned to put it in a duffel bag with my dirty laundry so that customs wouldn't look at it. But it was the only way I could test them on our fryers back in Oregon to see what would work. But and then the third piece was we made a connection with a company the first company to make tortilla chips in England, and they were doing it in a very natural, high quality way, and had made a pretty good splash in England. They were smart marketers, and we had visited them up in Durham, England, and agreed that they would help us market it. They owned a distribution company and help us with the sales and marketing. And so this was March, and I started making monthly trips to England to try to evolve this plan and vision. And I, managed to talk a local banker in Oregon to loan me the money, which again, he shouldn't have, because it was a hugely risky deal to, why should this little natural food brand that's only sold on the West Coast, why should it leap clear across the country, clear across the Atlantic, skip that and introduce it in England and introduce it largely to the mass market, because there wasn't there wasn't the level of natural food industry in England as there was in the US. So this was taking a big bet that kettle chips this natural product would be viable in the supermarkets. So by it took almost a year to set up the little plant with the furniture that the equipment that I acquired, and I did acquire the right equipment at that time. The learning had really evolved to do it right, and been through some iterations of these contracts. But by January of 1989, we began making kettle chips in this section of this potato chip factory that we had rented, and we launched it at an international food show in London with the help of this company in Durham that also had their tortilla chip. And then we had landed on a certain variety of potatoes that was used in the fish and chips world that had their own version of unique flavor. And we were off and going. So the product got launched into a group of small direct distributors that service the shelves, a whole group of them. We had rented a space at the London Heathrow Airport where invited all these distributors and unveiled kettle chips with the help of this partner company. And there was a lot of excitement. And the product went out into the market, and then everything went quiet. We weren't getting reorders. And of course, we had no marketing. We had no marketing budget. It was all meant to be word of mouth. We were also offering a size of package that had never been offered, a bigger package, a premium price point that had never been, done in the potato chip world. So we came in very premium. My friend that was helping me with that, my London-based friend who'd been a banker, he insisted. He was a financial guy, and he said he insisted that we need to have a premium price, get outstanding margins, so that we could reinvest in this brand and grow it when the time comes. And so I was pretty initially uncomfortable with for coming out at this premium. I mean, much higher premium, even relative to the U.S. what we're doing. But we launched with a premium, and then we weren't getting any orders. And so I thought, well, it's one of two things. They're just rejecting the price and maybe the product, or it's just going to take time for word of mouth. We had no idea if they liked it or not. The sole test market we had done months earlier is I'd brought 10 cases of Oregon, US-based kettle chips on a plane, and they were kind of our smaller 1 ounce bags, but we talked a little convenience store in a train station in London to put them on their shelf, and we'd give it to them for free. But we dictated the price and gave them the 10 cases, and they sold out in a week. So that was our sole test market. Based on that, I committed, debt, and committed, the equipment, and committed to launching this product in January of '89. So a couple months went by, and I would, back and forth. I'd go back to the U.S. and and then back to the UK. But, I was stressed because I had truly bet the company on the debt that I had taken on. And if we failed in the UK, it would have taken the whole US company under as well. And so orders started to trickle in after about 6 weeks. And then we got to the beginning of June. And so I started feeling better. And I was over there in June, but all of a sudden it was like somebody switched on or put things into high gear, or switched the bright lights gear switch on. That suddenly demand just went through the roof. We just were inundated with demand. There was just a critical mass of, I think, word of mouth and enough people that tried it. And, all these stores wanted it. All 5 of the major supermarket chains, buyers called us, including Marks and Spencer's. It was just, we were overwhelmed. And so we spent the next many years just chasing that demand. And we didn't really do any marketing. We just built up capacity and built up our organization of workers as quickly as we could to meet demand. And Kettle Chips became a symbol for kind of the cultural change that was happening in the UK. And my perception in 1987 and seeing the glimmer of this lifestyle change around health and fitness and natural foods, better foods, Kettle Chips became one of the symbols for that change. And the stores wanted that in their stores because they wanted those consumers. And so the brand grew up very fast in the UK and eventually surpassed the business we were doing in Oregon. And it became profitable relatively quickly because of those margins. And this gentleman, former banker, ultimately became a partner in the company. I gave him some sweat equity shares because I needed somebody based in the UK to watch over things. I couldn't live there full time. So that was an amazing experience. I really enjoyed doing business in the UK and ultimately in Europe. I just liked the way they did business and maybe still do. But the brand became a pretty big brand over there. And we began making Marks and Spencer's own label. And they're very demanding on quality. They have their own food scientists that go out in the field and tour and make sure their suppliers are doing the best job possible. And so we were forced to grow in sophistication, our organization around quality and being more scientific. And we had some hard meetings with them at times where we were not, meeting their standards, but really, I really have them to thank for, growing the organization's capacities to, have proper disciplines and make the very best products.
Yeah, Cameron, I want to hear how, it's, I feel like the journey is riveting. It's, you say things calmly now. I can't imagine, there's a lot of moving pieces with all of this. I'd love to hear. Yeah, go ahead.
And I'll say that there were, it kind of became part of the popular culture at that time. And it became, it was on a comedy show, a woman named Ruby Wax, who was very popular then, but she just put it on her show and had skits using the product. It just kind of became in the media, none of which we were investing in. There was an experience. My partner and I and his wife went to what was the happening restaurant in London at the time, a celebrity chef. And we went and had, a little celebration of what was happening on a Friday night and had a meal. And we were the last ones to leave the restaurant. We got out on the sidewalk. My partner knew the owner, and the owner came out and said, "We'd like you guys to come back in to the dining room for a second." Okay, whatever. And we came back in, and he had his whole staff, the chefs and the servers and the bussers, and they were all assembled in the living room or in the dining room. And I was like, well, what's going on here? And then they all started clapping us and just giving us praise for launching this product in the UK that people loved so much, and that it had a high standard of quality. And that was a very moving, kind of humbling thing, that here is kind of one of the best noteworthy restaurants in London, and their staff is and including their owner, is recognizing this product that we brought from Oregon. So there was a lot of kind of nice ego builders, I guess.
Yeah, it's
but gratifying.
It's pretty telling, and you took a big risk. I mean,
oh yeah.
You took a big risk. There's no doubt about it. And I would love to hear. So I want to talk about Kona, but how did the journey? I wouldn't say end, but kind of start to conclude for you with Kettle Chips. And one of my personal favorites of this journey is the sea salt, rosemary, and garlic. That's my personal kettle chip favorite. But how did things then evolve and progress towards when, I don't know if you stepped away or what, how that concluded your journey with Kettle Chips?
Yeah. So really, the path. Ultimately, I found myself as the CEO of a, somewhat global snack business. Kettle Chips continued to grow in the U.S. and was in the natural snack category, was the leader in the U.S. and then it grew into the supermarkets as well. And so we managed a team on both sides of the ocean, and Kettle Foods was really built on some real simple core values of commitment to quality, above all, respect for your team, and then being responsible and giving back to the community. And those were, those we propagated both in the UK and the US. And as a result, we had a great people culture and a lot of very dedicated individuals. And that to me is really the core of the success of Kettle Chips and Kettle Foods, was this great community of people that were extremely dedicated. But really, by now we're in the 2000s. I don't know if you want me. I'm kind of going chronologically, but I can kind of wind up the Kettle Chip story, and then I'll go backwards to the
that's perfect,
to the Kona Brewing. But anyway, the brand grew significantly. I think by the time we're in the low hundreds of millions, we were in the hundreds of 100 million category globally. We decided we needed to have a board. We were we had hundreds of employees, and it was just my partner and I usually making decisions in a pub, and it had gotten big enough. We need to have some disciplines and recruit a proper CEO and create a board. And my partner had a friend who had founded a private equity group, L. Catterton Partners is what it's called now, a guy named Michael Chu, who I got to know, and he was very brand oriented. And we started talking to him about our next phase, and he said, well, we'd be interested in investing you guys and help you, myself and my lead guy, Scott Danke, we would be happy to be your board members. And so my partner and I talked about it long and hard and decided to take a minority investment in 2004. And largely because our company was very profitable, 20% EBITDA on revenue. But we really wanted these guys on our board and for them to help guide us in building the next phase of the company and create proper strategies and recruit a CEO. So we did that. And then we recruited a really awesome CEO. We got really lucky, a guy named Paul Davis. And so I stepped back and my partner stepped back. As board members, I became chair, and there were 5 of us on the board, and we met as often as needed. But we developed a strategy plan, got some outside help to what the potential for the Kettle brand would be, and began exercising that. And after a couple of years of that, we started, and we were having very strong growth. We started having some companies sniffing around, wanting to talk about acquisitions. And we felt it was a little bit premature, but we said, well, if it's the right people and they offer, the right value, if they recognize the right value, we would consider that. And so a group did. It was another London-based private equity group called Lion Capital. And so we sold the company to them completely in 2006. And, what they got was, a really strong growth-oriented brand with a great team, with a real active, vital company culture, and a strategy plan that we were only 2 years into a 5-year plan. And they executed on that plan the next 3 years and did really well. They, doubled the business and, I think tripled the EBITDA. And it was then sold to a food manufacturer. But the brand continues to thrive.
Amazing.
And part of snack division, Snyder's Lance Snyder snack division, part of Campbell Soup, but it still does well. And I visit our original factory in Salem, Oregon every couple of years, and they still practice a lot of those core values and still have the signs on the wall that support those values. And some of the old timers are still there, but
wow.
Very fulfilling. But I put my 28 years into that. I was kind of ready to
move
on. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So where does Kona come into the picture?
Well, I've had a habit of starting businesses in places where I want to spend time. And that's what happened with Kettle Foods, and going, opening an operation in England was the primary motivator. Really was I wanted to spend more time in England and Europe because I really enjoyed being over there. And opening a business was a kind of an excuse and a discipline of you got to be there. So in 1993, my father had just passed away a few weeks earlier, but I'd had a planned trip to Kona, Hawaii with my family. My oldest son had come to Kona with his girlfriend that summer on a vacation, didn't come back. They found paradise and jobs. And so I'd never been to the big island of Hawaii, but I brought my family over and for Thanksgiving, which was a few months later, and we rented a vacation rental with some friends that came along on a little bay on South Kona. I didn't even really know where it was. My son had kind of recommended it. And we were here for 10 days, but I had an epiphany. Just was kind of moved by this place, this bay, this specific zone in South Kona. It's an old fishing village, very authentic old school Hawaiian. And there was kind of a powerful spiritual sense I had about the place. It's hard to explain it in a practical manner, but so I've got to figure out how to live here in this specific spot, at least part-time. And out of that same trip, my son and I, we started talking, and my idea was my thoughts were, well, if I'm going to live here, there's got to be some fresh craft beer, because I was from Portland, Oregon, where kind of was the epicenter of how craft beer started in the U.S. And there were lots of examples of some wonderful craft brewing operations. And I almost started a small brewery with a partner in Portland at one couple of years earlier, but didn't. So we had the idea, well, there was no beer of any kind aside from home brewers, but no commercial beer of any type being brewed in the whole state. And we thought, well, why don't we start a craft brewery? I'll mentor you, teach you to be the general manager, and we'll get it started together, and I'll find the capital. And so we did, and I told him, you've got 2 years of my time. I was still CEO of Kettle Foods, so I was very busy, but I'll come over and help you with this. And so, and that took about a year to put it together. We designed. I in Portland, Oregon, had hired a gentleman from a brewery who was their facilities guy to moonlight and design some brewing equipment. And I had a stainless steel fabricator I used for Kettle Foods that had never built brewing equipment. You couldn't really buy off the shelf craft brewing equipment at that time. It was just starting to become available. But anyway, we, redesigned the wheel and brought this equipment over here and got it started. And we had our opening blessing on Valentine's Day of 1995. We'd incorporated in 94, and the goal is to be a leader in the market. It's a small market, but it has a lot of visitors. And by then, 2 other little breweries had opened. We all kind of opened within a month of each other. These other 2 in Oahu. But the vision was from the start to be the ultimate leader. There had been a previous brand in Hawaii for 100 years that was kind of the signature that had this following, but it was no longer around, and so it was this opportunity to become the signature Hawaiian beer. Again, we learned the hard way. Made some poor batches initially. We bought a used Italian bottling line that didn't work half the time, and we'd have to air freight parts from Italy, which was very expensive. We also found it was very, doing business in Hawaii, and particularly manufacturing in Hawaii, is very expensive. It's the most expensive state in the U.S., and also taxes are the highest here, and including liquor taxes. To distribute, you've got to just ship your beer from one island to the next island to the next island. We got our products out there in hotels and resorts and stores, but we were losing our shirts, about $20,000 a month, and that went on for a couple of years, and I was having to fill that gap with money that I was pulling out of Kettle Foods as it was prospering. I was having to, rob from Peter to pay Paul, and then after a couple of years of this, my son then left the business, and I brought a young guy in from Oregon that had never run a manufacturing business, but and my son did a great job getting the beachhead established, and he'd hired friends, a brewer and a guy who had a degree in marketing and communication, so he was the salesman. And through that team, we made our beachheads, but we then needed to make a next step. And my son departed, and we kind of ended up turning over during that period. That whole team, they moved back to the mainland and brought in new people, and it was kind of a reboot, if you will. And this one gentleman I brought, he didn't have manufacturing experience, but he had restaurant and specifically gourmet pizza restaurant experiences, and that was part of the goal master plan. It was develop a pub as part of our brewery. We just had a tasting room, and we learned in those first few months of that next phase that we couldn't bottle beer and do it profitably in Hawaii, and we needed to find a contract brewer on the West Coast. We also needed to get our pub opened to improve those margins from making beer in the back and selling it at full retail in the front. And so, that took, in the beginning of that phase, that took about a year and a half to accomplish that, to find that contract brewer in California and to open this pizza pub. And literally the month that we opened that pub and began bringing the bottled beer from California to Hawaii, we went from red ink to black ink, and really didn't look back. And so we continued to brew draft beer in our brewery in Hawaii and bring in our bottled beer from the mainland. And that relationship, where we ultimately ended up having our contract relationship, it wasn't in the beginning, but after a year or so, we ended up with a friend of mine, the Widmer brothers in Oregon, that had a pretty good sized brewery. They just built a new brewery and had lots of capacity, and invited us to bring our contract business to them. And so I did that. And then over time, that was working really well. And they said, well, we've got this whole sales team. Why don't we do a partnership thing, and we'll start selling it in the mainland. We were dabbling in that on ourselves and not being very successful. And we said, okay, let's do that. But in order to do that, we had to trade some minor shares, because Widmer Brewing was owned 32% by Anheuser-Busch. And to access the Anheuser-Busch distribution system, there had to be some ownership relationship to Anheuser-Busch. So we did that stock trade and had I think 7 different contractual agreements that were created. And so we began selling beer in the mainland U.S. And that ended up being a fortuitous relationship, because that grew, the brand grew, our business in Hawaii evolved, our little pub grew into a $10 million a year restaurant with lots of t-shirt and hat and, logo wear sales.
Liquid love.
Yeah.
Liquid aloha.
Liquid aloha is what
aloha. Yeah, exactly.
And we opened another restaurant pub in Oahu, just outside of Honolulu. But the brand began growing in the mainland, and Anheuser-Busch was our distributor here in Hawaii. And that distribution relationship with Anheuser-Busch turned into a real key to the success of Kona Brewing, because they have the best distribution in the world. And we also had a strong sales team. I'll say that I'll go back to briefly, I'll digress that in creating the brand, I was going to make an early trip to Hawaii to pitch the Anheuser-Busch distributor in Hawaii, but we were nothing. We didn't even have a logo, and so I approached my cousin, who was a graphic designer, and I said, I need a logo. This was Thursday. I need a logo by Monday, because I need to make up some T-shirts and a business card to pitch these guys in Hawaii. And she said, well, I don't work under that kind of speed. And I said, well, just give it a try. And she nailed the logo by Monday. I mean, it's the logo that still exists. And I said, you've got it. It's great. So I had a couple, some polo shirts, silkscreen and business cards. And my son and I went and pitched ourselves to the Anheuser-Busch distributor. But anyway, fast forward, the relationship with Widmer did eventually evolve. By 2010, we did a full merger together. So Kona Brewing became, a full piece of what was then called Craft Brew Alliance, which had Red Hook Brewing also was part of its group. So we became part of a group, and that allowed the Kona brand to expand, particularly in the mainland, because that group had their own existing breweries. By then, they had one on the East Coast, one in Seattle, and of course, one in Portland. And so part of our philosophy with the Kona brand was to put it, to produce it close to its market and limit its carbon footprint. And so that really became, important part of our model, is rather than make beer in Hawaii with one big brewery and ship it all to the mainland, which is expensive, and eats up a lot of fuel and whatnot. Our product, Kona Brewing, was being made in four locations: Kona, Hawaii, Portland, Seattle, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And so we ran with that in the last decade, and the Kona brand became, by last summer, the eighth largest craft brand in the U.S. by volume size. And of the top 10 by last summer, only 2 of them that were actually still growing. And Anheuser-Busch had their sights on Kona Brewing for the last few years, and we actually had approached us. There were some options that didn't work out, but late last summer we completed a full merger of the parent company, Craft Brew Alliance, which Kona brand was 70% of that. That was the dominant brand of that group, and so now it's all under Anheuser-Busch's Craft Alliance, it's called, and that's a group of about 25 craft breweries that they own, which Kona is one of the bigger ones. But the journey of Kona Brewing has been a really rich one. The engagement in the community, we've supported all kinds of events and ambassadors of watermen and waterwomen, and it's just a great culture here. We always pledge to respect the traditional Hawaiian culture, and engaged and contributed to a lot of the perpetuation of the culture, and the company still does that today. But a really great, fun, rich experience of that. And all I ever wanted out of it was I wanted to
live in Hawaii.
Drink free beer from complimentary beer and complimentary pizza at the pub. And so that's what I've gotten to do the last 20 plus years. Is I've never ever taken a salary out of the business. And then with this sale, and I have a draft system at my home. I live on the bay that I had the epiphany. I was eventually able to buy a property and build a home. I live in that spot that in 1993 spoke to me, and it still speaks to me today. That's why I'm here. And even under the new ownership, I continue as a advisor, and I still get my free beer and pizza. So I
think you deserve it at this point.
Yeah. So that's a almost 27-year journey there.
Wow. Cameron, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing your stories. You've been super generous with your time. I have one last question before I ask it. Everyone should check out the HealyFoundation.org. Check out what they're doing there. Check out other episodes of the podcast and Rise 25. Cameron, my last question. There's just been a treasure trove of gems of lessons here that you've shared, and I appreciate that. My last question is just, what are some of your favorite natural snacks that you like? I mean, we've talked about kettle chips. I talked about wild tonic kombucha. I've had other people like Truth Bar on the podcast, which I love, just having the products that I love to eat and consume. I'm curious, what are some of your favorites? over like currently or over the years?
Yeah, well, of course, I still eat kettle chips. I did not negotiate free kettle chips, unfortunately, so I do still purchase those. And I still eat that Hava chips, which I mentioned I distributed in the 70s that haven't changed packaging or formula wise at all since then. And so that tends to be my go-to tortilla chip. I eat some others as well. But I do like Kind bars when I'm out active in the outdoors. I do like, there's a brand of, what are they called? Epic.
Oh yeah.
Meat
Epic.
snacks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big meat eater, but I like their salmon strips and I eat those when I travel. Gosh. And then just, here in Hawaii, we've got macadamia nuts. Farmers are always giving me raw macadamia nuts that they've harvested and cracked. So I eat macadamia nuts here. I love them. I love almonds and make my own trail mix and make my own granola. I eat granola as a snack. That's kind of it. But I'm still a chip fiend, and I have to say that if kettle chips are if they're to be bad for you, I would be dead now because I've eaten probably more kettle chips than anybody on the planet. I still do. And I'm 70 years old and I'm surfing and, doing all kinds of active things. But
there you go.
Anyway, it's been a nice journey. And I feel privileged to be able to run this foundation and have impacts in areas that really deserve it. And I think particularly during COVID, the hunger, the food scarcity and the child hunger was just appalling and heart-wrenching. And we were able to pivot last April and take a quarter of our funding for the year and contribute it just in the month of April to COVID, to nonprofits that were addressing the impacts of COVID and on families and kids. And our team really did a great job in executing that. And that's.
Are there other causes that you may want to mention? What do you remember? Any of the causes that they may have handled?
A whole number of nonprofit, but food pantries and groups that do work around domestic abuse, particularly with children. People that just are doing the hard work on front lines. But I think what gave me inspiration through this last year of COVID and all the other stuff that was going down was being able to be a funder and a support of these people that operate these nonprofits in the Oregon and Hawaii where we do our work, is these people that have such a positive giving service attitude and making a real impact. It's not political. They just get on with it and go in, with some of the hardest, most difficult environments and make a difference. And that really gave me positive inspiration through the year and kept me from becoming a little bit despondent of some of the things that were going on. So I feel very, very humbled and proud to be part of that particular movement.
Cameron, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thank you, everyone. Check out the HealyFoundation.org, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for your time.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find